Today, you can cross the United States for less than the price of a dinner. But just decades ago, it was a luxury a few people could afford. The reason we can do that today comes to one aircraft in particular, the Boeing 737. The design of the aircraft is so simple, yet so genius that it helped make flying affordable, reliable, and accessible to millions of people around the world, laying the foundation for the low-cost air travel we take for granted today. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of the Boeing 737. Low-cost flying wasn't something new. Even back in the 1960s, airlines were already experimenting with cheaper fares and simplified service. Aircraft like the Douglas DC-9, the BAC-111 were designed specifically for short-haul routes, offering smaller capacity and greater flexibility compared to earlier jets. But there was still a problem. These aircraft were good, but they weren't optimized for what low-cost flying would eventually become. Operating costs remained relatively high, with fuel-hungry engines and maintenance requirements that limited efficiency. In some cases, cockpit crews still included 3 members, adding to operational expenses. And perhaps most importantly, turnaround times were not yet a core part of the design, meaning aircraft often spent more time on the ground than airlines would have liked. Low-cost flying existed, but it wasn't yet efficient enough to truly scale. At the same time, Boeing was facing a different challenge. Its product lineup had a clear gap. The Boeing 707 dominated long-haul routes, while the Boeing 727 served medium-distance markets. But when it came to short, high-frequency routes, Boeing had no direct competitor. Meanwhile, other manufacturers were already establishing themselves in this growing segment. As Boeing studied the short-haul market more closely, a clear pattern began to emerge. Airlines weren't just looking for smaller aircraft, they were asking for something fundamentally different. They needed lower operating costs, simpler maintenance, faster turnaround times, and the flexibility to operate efficiently across a wide range of airports. In essence, they needed an aircraft designed not just for short distances, but for high-frequency operations. One that could spend more time in the air and less time on the ground. One airline in particular played a key role in shaping this vision: Lufthansa. The German carrier was searching for a compact, efficient jet tailored to dense European routes, where reliability, quick operations, and cost efficiency were critical. Their input helped define many of the requirements that would guide the aircraft's development. Boeing realized that the industry didn't simply need another short-haul jet, it needed a more efficient one, combining airline demands, competitive pressure, and its own strategic need to enter this market. The company made a decisive move. After receiving approval from its board of directors, Boeing began development of a new aircraft designed to be smaller, simpler, and more efficient than anything it had built before. That aircraft would become the Boeing 737. The aircraft was designed from the beginning to be a lower-cost alternative to the already established short-haul jets. But instead of starting entirely from scratch, Boeing took a pragmatic approach. The fuselage cross-section was derived from the Boeing 707, allowing for a 6-abreast seating configuration, while a significant portion of the structure and systems drew from the Boeing 727. This approach reduced development time, lowered costs, and ensured proven reliability from the very beginning. Early design concepts looked quite different from what we know today. Initial proposals featured engines mounted at the rear of the fuselage and a T-tail configuration similar to the 727. But a key decision changed everything. Engineer Joe Sutter pushed for the engines to be moved under the wings. This seemingly simple change had a major impact. By mounting the engines on the wings, the aircraft structure became lighter and more aerodynamically efficient, while also freeing up space in the rear fuselage. But one of the most important consequences of this design choice was how the engines were mounted. Instead of using long pylons, the engine nacelles were placed directly under the wings. This allowed the landing gear to be significantly shorter, bringing the aircraft much closer to the ground. That low ground clearance became one of the defining characteristics of the Boeing 737, and that had huge operational advantages. With the fuselage sitting lower, passengers could board more easily using simple stairs, and baggage handling became quicker and more efficient. In many cases, there was no need for expensive airport infrastructure like jet bridges. Early versions of the aircraft even included built-in air stairs, allowing it to operate almost independently of ground equipment. All of this translated directly into faster turnaround times, a critical factor for airlines trying to maximize daily flights. At the same time, Boeing placed a strong emphasis on simplicity and maintainability. Compared to larger jets, the aircraft uses less complex systems, making it easier to service and repair. This reduced downtime and allowed airlines to keep the aircraft in the air for longer periods, which is exactly where it generates revenue. Over time, the Boeing 737 would become known for its high reliability and strong dispatch rates, both essential for high-frequency operations. Another major advantage came from the cockpit design. Unlike aircraft such as the Boeing 727, which required a 3-person crew, the 737 was designed for just 2 pilots. This reduced crew costs on every flight and simplified operations. And as the aircraft evolved, Boeing maintained a high level of commonality between different variants. This meant pilots could transition between models with minimal additional training, and maintenance procedures remained largely consistent across fleets. This combination of simplicity, efficiency, and operational flexibility made the aircraft uniquely suited to a new type of airline model. Companies like Southwest Airlines in the United States and later Ryanair in Europe built their entire operations around the Boeing 737. By standardizing their fleets, minimizing downtime, and maximizing aircraft utilization, they were able to offer something that had never truly scaled before: consistently low-cost air travel. The first customer of the Boeing 737 was Lufthansa. On February 19, 1965, the German airline placed an order for 21 aircraft, but only after receiving assurances from Boeing that the project would not be cancelled. At the time, the program was still a risk, and without that initial commitment, the aircraft might never have made it into production. Working closely with Lufthansa, Boeing refined the design to better match airline needs. The initial version, later designated the 737-100, featured an increased seating capacity of more than 100 passengers, but it quickly became clear that airlines wanted more. Following requests from United Airlines, Boeing developed a longer and more capable variant, the 737-200, which would go on to become the first truly successful version of the aircraft. From there, the 737 didn't just succeed, it evolved. Over the decades, new generations were introduced, each one larger, more efficient, and more capable than the last. From the Classic series to the next generation, and later the MAX family, the aircraft continuously adapted to changing technologies and market demands, all while maintaining the same core philosophy: efficiency, simplicity, and reliability. But the true impact of the Boeing 737 can best be seen in the airlines that built their entire business models around it. In the United States, Southwest Airlines embraced the aircraft as the foundation of its operations. By flying a single aircraft type, the airline reduced training, maintenance, and operational complexity to a minimum. Across the Atlantic, Ryanair followed a similar strategy, scaling it aggressively across Europe. Despite operating in completely different markets, both airlines relied on the same formula: fast turnarounds, high aircraft utilization, and strict cost control, all enabled by the 737. The result was a transformation of air travel. Ticket prices dropped, routes expanded, and flying became accessible to a much larger portion of the population. What was once considered a luxury gradually became an everyday mode of transportation. By the mid-2000s, the scale of that impact was undeniable. Thousands of 737s were in service worldwide, operated by hundreds of airlines and connecting destinations across nearly every continent. For several consecutive years, it became the most frequently flown commercial aircraft in the world, a reflection not just of its popularity, but of how deeply it had embedded itself into the global aviation system. Its versatility didn't go unnoticed outside commercial aviation either. The platform proved so adaptable that it was modified for a wide range of military roles. Variants like the Boeing 737 AEW provided airborne early warning capabilities, while the Boeing P-8 Poseidon became a key asset in maritime patrol and surveillance. Other versions, such as the Boeing C-40 Clipper and Boeing T-43, were adapted for transport and training roles. In the end, the legacy of the Boeing 737 goes far beyond its design. It didn't just become one of the most successful aircraft ever built, it helped reshape the economics of aviation itself, making air travel faster, cheaper, and more accessible than ever before. And in many ways, that story is still unfolding. Every day, thousands of Boeing 737 aircraft take off around the world, carrying millions of people to places that, not long ago, would have been out of reach. What began as a solution to a market gap became something far greater. A machine that changed how we move, how we connect, and how we see distance itself. Because in the end, the genius of the 737 wasn't just in its engineering, it was in what that engineering made possible. A world where flying is no longer a luxury, but a part of everyday life.